The Battle of Lexington and Concord. Now, to understand this battle, we have to understand what is happening in Boston in 1775. There are many problems going on between the colonists and the British soldiers. We can look back and we can see events such as the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, conflicts between the colonists and the British soldiers. Specifically, obviously, the Boston Massacre, where the British soldiers killed a group of civilians, and in the Boston Tea Party, where actually the British government came back with the Intolerable Acts, 5 different acts which limited the colonists' rights. Now, these problems led to the colonists feeling like they needed to form their own militias, one for their physical protection because of the Boston Massacre, but also to fight for their political freedom from the Intolerable Acts, or the coercive acts as Great Britain had called it. Now, as these militia members, these civilians serving as soldiers, were preparing to fight in and around Boston, this made the British very nervous. Okay? Now, I compare this to if you and your neighbor had a conflict of some kind, maybe a property line dispute, and the next day you see him take his gun out and start firing at a silhouette that looks like you. Okay? Of course, that's going to make you feel threatened by his presence. So this is the same about the British. The British know that these militia members are preparing to fight them. So they know they need to do something about this militia problem. So they come up with a plan. They decide that they are going to disarm the militia members and go after the leaders of the militia, who are both stationed in Concord. So Concord was a small village about 20 miles outside of Boston, where the militia members were hiding their guns, ammunition, and also their leaders. So they march out of Boston on April 19th, 1775. Their plan is to get to Concord and seize these guns, ammunition, and the leaders. Now, as they're leaving Boston, a local silversmith named Paul Revere and another local named William Dawes make their famous midnight ride, warning these villages around Boston that the British troops were marching their way and telling the militias to get ready. Now, one interesting point, we don't remember William Dawes. William Dawes actually went the opposite way in which the British marched out of Boston, and he ended up getting captured. We remember Paul Revere because he takes the path in which the Boston Army, or the British Army, takes out of Boston. So, in order for the British soldiers to reach Concord, they must first march through a small village called Lexington. Now, Lexington had been one of the first to be warned of the British soldiers coming. They had a small militia group assembled on the road, blocking the British passage through their town. Now, if you can imagine, you have a small number of militia members up against 200 British soldiers. So they're greatly outnumbered, they're outgunned, but they're also out-trained. So the militia members, though they're facing an uphill battle, they don't surrender. They don't back down. The British, time and time again, tell them to get off the road, and they don't move. The militia leader says, we will not fire unless fired upon. If they mean to make war, let it begin here. Now, this is when the shot heard round the world occurs. Now, no historian knows exactly which side fired the first shot. Many believe that it was actually a shot fired in a house off to the side of the village greens. When they heard this shot, both sides opened fire. Now, this was a pretty cut and dry victory for the British. They drove the militia members off because of their numbers and their training. You have to understand, the British soldiers were well trained. They could fire 4 shots from their muzzle-loading guns until militia members won. So their sheer firepower forced the militia off. The British soldiers end up marching on to Concord. Now, by this time, the militia members in Concord had already been warned about the approaching British soldiers. So they cleared all of their supplies and their leaders out of Concord. So they had a common hiding place where they kept things. News reached that they were coming, and they cleared everything out. So by the time the British got there, everything was already gone. It was already re-hidden. So the British mission to disarm the militias had failed. Now, as the British soldiers are searching Concord, about 1,000 militia members from in and around Boston have gathered outside of Concord. And as the British soldiers are trying to march back to Boston, these militia members are engaging on hit-and-run attacks, pretty much decimating this group of British soldiers, causing casualties, so killing, capturing, or wounding about 1/3 of their force. So literally they're making the British soldiers run back to Boston with their tails between their legs. So this was an embarrassing loss for the British because they did not capture any weapons or leaders in Concord, and they're basically run back to Boston by these ragtag militia members. Alright, so if you have any questions, make sure you watch the video again or come and ask me.